Welcome to CrimeSceneX. Today's video will cover 3 hunting horror stories. If you enjoy the stories, please leave a like, comment down below, share with friends, and subscribe for daily stories. Sit back and enjoy the video. It was the last weekend of hunting season, and the tension was palpable. The woods had been unyielding so far, and I needed to make the trip worthwhile. So with my rifle slung over my shoulder, I decided to trek deeper into the forest, far beyond where most hunters would go. I had heard tales from old-timers about how the forest became less forgiving the deeper you went, but I dismissed them as mere campfire stories. After several hours, I found myself in a dense thicket, untouched by human presence. The atmosphere was different here, denser, quieter, almost stifling. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, watching me. I found a spot to hunker down near a large fallen tree. Hours passed, but I saw no signs of deer or any other game. Just when I was considering packing up, I heard footsteps. They were soft, deliberate, and coming my way. My heart started to race as I readied my rifle. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, except as the figure came into view, I realized something was horribly wrong. It was a man, disheveled and filthy. His eyes were vacant, almost lifeless, but focused on me in a way that made my skin crawl. He was unarmed, yet I felt threatened. My finger hovered over the trigger, confused and hesitant. Before I could make a decision, he veered off into the dense foliage, disappearing as mysteriously as he had appeared. Who was he? A homeless man? A hermit? Or something else? I was unsettled but convinced myself to stay. Maybe a deer would still come by. Another hour passed, the sun setting, and I was about to call it a day when I heard another sound, this time a rustling behind me. I turned around slowly, trying not to make a sound. There, peeking out from behind a tree, was the same man. Fear seized me. The look in his eyes was predatory. I realized I was the one being hunted now. I stood up, aimed my rifle at him, and shouted, "Stay back." He didn't react. He just stood there looking at me. Then he did something I'll never forget. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that scared the hell out of me. A smile of knowing, of triumph. I fired a warning shot into the air, hoping the noise would scare him away. He flinched but didn't move. I weighed my options. It would be dark soon, and I was hours away from civilization. I made the tough choice to retreat. I backed away slowly, keeping my rifle trained on him until I was a good distance away. Then I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest, each step a mix of fear and desperation. The forest was a labyrinth, and the light was fading fast. I glanced back every so often, half expecting to see him trailing me, but he was nowhere in sight. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was pitch dark. I fumbled for my keys, my hands trembling uncontrollably, and drove away as fast as I could. I never returned to those deep woods, haunted by the experience, haunted by the man whose intentions I'll never know. It was the most terrifying hunt of my life, a day when the tables were turned and I became the prey. I had always thought of hunting as a solitary pursuit, a quiet interlude to everyday chaos, a chance to be one with nature. That was the allure that took me to a secluded cabin in the forest, miles away from the nearest town. No distractions, no obligations, just me and the wilderness. I looked forward to this weekend every year, but this time, the experience would be anything but serene. As always, I arrived just before dusk, unpacked, and readied my gear for the next day. The cabin had no electricity or modern amenities, and that was fine by me. I went to sleep early, excited for the next day's hunt. I woke up at dawn and prepared a quick breakfast. Stepping out of the cabin, I felt the crisp morning air fill my lungs, invigorating me for the day ahead. I shouldered my rifle and started my trek through the dense forest, moving quietly, alert to every sound, every movement. After a few hours, I found a perfect spot near a clearing and settled in to wait. A light drizzle began to fall, but that didn't bother me. In fact, it seemed like the rain heightened my senses. Hours passed, but I saw no game. Just when I was about to call it a day, I heard a noise, a rustling from the undergrowth, different from the small animals I'd been hearing all day. My heart began to pound in anticipation, and I raised my rifle, but then I froze. Through the scope, I could see it wasn't an animal at all. It was a man. He was dressed in ragged clothing, layered against the weather. I lowered my rifle immediately, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. And then, I felt the fear set in. Why was there a stranger so deep in the forest, so far from civilization? He looked disoriented, stumbling over rocks and fallen logs. I considered calling out to him, but something held me back, a gut feeling that told me to stay silent, to observe. As I watched, he took a small notebook from his pocket and began to write something down. Then he looked around cautiously, as if sensing he was being watched. Our eyes met through the scope, and he froze. What happened next still haunts me. He picked up a rock, wrote something on it, and then placed it carefully on a tree stump in the clearing. I waited until he moved away, his steps now hurried, before going down to read what he had written. The message on the rock made my heart skip a beat. "You are in danger. Leave now." I returned to the cabin as quickly as I could, my mind racing. What had the man meant? Why was I in danger? Once inside, I locked the door and loaded my rifle, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. As darkness enveloped the cabin, my senses were on high alert. I strained my ears for any sound, jumped at every creak the old structure made. The night dragged on endlessly, yet nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a fitful sleep. When I woke up, it was still dark outside. I felt a sense of unease and immediately knew something was wrong. My rifle was gone. Panicked, I searched the cabin and found that not only was the rifle missing, but so was my phone and my truck keys. I was stranded, defenseless. Then I remembered the message. "You are in danger. Leave now." The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The man wasn't warning me about some external threat. He was the threat. He'd been in my cabin while I slept. I fled on foot, making my way through the forest in the dead of night. Every noise amplified my fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached a road and flagged down a passing car. The police found my cabin ransacked, but could never locate the man or my stolen belongings. I never went back to that cabin, and I gave up my solitary hunting trips for good. It was the first day of deer hunting season, and the anticipation had been building for weeks. All year, I'd been honing my skills, reading up on the latest techniques, and maintaining my equipment. I had a special place I always went to, a secluded stretch of woodland several miles from the nearest town. My friends often joked that my secret spot was so remote, even the deer hadn't heard of it. Early in the morning, I parked my truck and started the trek into the forest. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves crunched satisfyingly beneath my boots. It was perfect hunting weather, and I was brimming with excitement. But as the day wore on, my enthusiasm started to wane. Despite my best efforts, I wasn't having any luck. The deer seemed to have vanished. By the afternoon, frustration had set in. Determined to make the day count, I decided to venture further into the woods than I ever had before. Surely I'd find something deeper in the wilderness. But my watchful eyes and keen ears found nothing. Hours seemed to blend into each other as the sun started its descent. I realized I needed to head back before darkness settled in. That's when it hit me. I didn't recognize my surroundings. The towering trees, once a source of solitude, now seemed menacing. I picked a direction and started walking, but everything looked the same. Panicking, I quickened my pace. As the sky darkened, I stumbled upon a clearing. What I saw there made my heart stop. A human body. The man was sprawled on the ground, his clothes torn and his face twisted in a final expression of terror. My stomach churned at the sight, but what really unnerved me was his hunting gear strewn about. The rifle, the knife, and the bag, all similar to my own equipment. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course there was no signal. I was lost, standing beside a dead man in the middle of nowhere. The gravity of my situation sank in, and I felt an overwhelming urge to get out. Fast. Using the remaining light, I marked the area as best as I could, planning to lead authorities back here later. I started walking again, now more desperate than ever, relying on a basic sense of direction to lead me back to civilization. Every noise startled me. Every shadow seemed to dance menacingly. Was the fate of the man in the clearing going to be my own? After what seemed like hours, I saw a flicker of light in the distance. I mustered the last bit of energy I had and ran towards it. As I got closer, the light grew brighter, and soon enough I could see the outline of my truck parked where I had left it. Never had I been so relieved. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station and reported what I had found. It took them 2 days to locate the body based on my directions. It turned out the man had been missing for weeks, a seasoned hunter like me who had gotten lost and succumbed to the elements. While they never found any sign of foul play, the experience shook me to my core. I returned to civilization profoundly changed, haunted not by what I had seen, but by the understanding of how easily it could have been me. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please like the video, comment what you thought, and subscribe for daily uploads.